one thing in social science is pretty well established is that like people that have faith, that have families, or you can have all the grit you want, but you also, as a struggling quarterback trying to figure out my life, some reliable practices that help me realize. If you ask a scientist to measure talent, we don't have great answers. If you want to be intentional about who you can become as a professional, if you want to be intentional about how you can develop your skills, why is it that you spend a lot of time doing something and not become an expert? And the reason why is because deliberate practice is four things. One is, if you want to get better at something, first is you need. I think what I can primarily share with your audience is, if you're trying to do things the intentional way, you gotta. A lot of people miss these growth opportunities because they're finding joy in the process, realizing when things are tough, that is the dream. I think that's one of the magic secrets of the very deep secrets of people that are extraordinary achievers.
Welcome to the Intentional Way, where literally every moment is a step towards purposeful living. I'm Bryan Hatch, here to explore the power of intention with you. Learn from our guests who embody intentionality. I'm glad you're here with me. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Intentional Way. I'm your host, Bryan Hatch, and as always, I'm extremely excited to have our guest with us here today. The person I'm excited to announce that is on our podcast today is Dr. Danny Southwick. He is the man, the myth, and the legend. I mean, he's played professional sports, professional football, arena football, and he's also a doctor. He focused on the elements of positive psychology, gone through a really rigorous program, not one that a lot of people get through and go through, which I'm really excited for him to hopefully share some of those details, and earned his PhD. He's an associate professor at BYU right now, and just a guy that I'm fascinated by so many reasons. Welcome to the show, Danny.
Thanks, Brian. Good to see you.
Yeah. Well, as we get started, one of the questions I love to ask our guests as we get moving is, what is something, you have a Wikipedia page, right? People could go find out some stats about you and some things about you, but tell us something that people wouldn't be able to find about you online.
Probably stuff about my nuclear family, like my wife and kids. We don't do a ton online, and so you wouldn't know how important being a dad is to me. You wouldn't know how important my relationship with my wife is to me, and those are really essential aspects of my identity and what I do every day, right? So I think, I think that would be the blind spot the internet doesn't see.
Well, good. And where does that come from, Danny? What makes you connected to your family? I mean, a lot of people have families, but I don't know that not every one of our guests have introduced themselves that way. What is it about your family that has you feel that way? Or what's something about you that makes you feel that way?
Well, the reason I introduced myself that way specifically is because you said, what does the internet not know about you? But why is that essential aspect of my identity? It comes back to my belief system. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and families are really important. And that's been kind of the cultural dynamic, spiritual dynamic that I've been raised with and have been around in my life. And then growing up and making these decisions, my gosh, I guess there's good reason why, at least in my sense, why we have these traditions and customs and expectations, because they bring more happiness, right? And I can for sure say that's true in my life. I remember when my son was born, I talked to my wife and he just said, did anything mean anything at all before this? Because life was just so much more meaningful. It was like a qualitative shift. And so being a dad of now 3 kids who I love equally, all more than I can say, and a wife who I feel the same way about, and as my partner and a best friend. Yeah, that's everything in my life. And then of course, the researcher in me wants to say, it's not just my experience, right? So we have lots of data now in social science showing that people who are married and people who really come from kind of a religious background, they tend to, regardless of what your perspective is on the actual truth behind our beliefs, one thing in social science is pretty well established is that people that have faith, that have families, are happier, and they experience their life as more meaningful. They respond from challenges better, and that's I'm an N of one, meaning like I'm only one, and anecdotal, one data point, right? But for me, that's definitely been true, and that's the kind of foundation of my life.
Yeah. I love the scientific approach that at least some of that you present. And I wonder, with the family being so important in your life, how you occur to me as a pretty busy guy. I mean, going through a PhD program, playing professional sports, I don't feel like you're like sitting on your hands doing nothing. So how is that dynamic of working so hard professionally and doing the things that you've done? How has that affected those relationships or strengthened them?
Well, I'm not sure that I do it really well, honestly. I mean, I always feel like I'm trying to navigate that balance. And I think one thing it has made me do is just force me to get clarity about what my priorities are, and then try to live my life in a way that I'm balancing my resources, which is my primary resource for all of us at that time, money being a distant second. But yeah, I guess my time and my emotional resources, trying to balance those in a way that reflects my priorities. And I don't think I always do it. It's easy to get sucked up in work. It's easy to get sucked up in the next project. It's easy to get sucked up in the delusion that when I get done with this project, or when I accomplish this thing, or when I'm through with this program, then I will be a great dad. But we're always going to have something, especially in the years that we're raising our kids. And the time goes by like that. And you know that, Frank. How many kids do you have?
I have 4 kids now. Yeah.
Yeah, you know that, Frank. It goes by like my oldest son just turned 10, more than halfway through his childhood. It's like, oh no, stop. Don't grow up so fast. So I think I've become more intentional about how I schedule my day, about how I structure my week. Well, I'm far from perfect, but having things that you really care about forces you to do that. If you're trying to live life at a high level at all, and it's an area I still need to work on, but it's certainly in kind of the front of my mind, in my set of goals that I have for myself. Like, okay, I really want to prioritize and cherish the time I have with my family.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you for sharing. The question that comes to my mind in hearing, that work-life balance and professional and that time to create space for the family has me very quickly think about your work. And I'm saying what you worked on in your PhD and what you worked on for many years in positive psychology. I think that there are so many listeners that need to hear what you know. And I know you teach that as a professor, but tell us a little bit how you got there, a little bit of what got you on the path of positive psychology, and then tell us a little more about like even what that is. I don't know that all of our listeners would be aware of what the definition of that is.
Yeah. So, and to be clear, so positive psychology is one area of research that I focus on, and there's lots of different areas within psychology, but positive psychology was the first one. And certainly, Bryan, your audience doesn't know, you and I have worked together somewhat in the past. And at the time, I think I was coming out of a master's program in positive psychology, and then went into a PhD research psychology program at Penn. And positive psychology runs through the kind of like it is a common thread in a lot of what I think about and study. So let me see if I remember your question. So your question was, how did I get into this? And then what is positive psychology, right?
Yeah. What got you interested in those subjects? And I know I've named one. It sounds like I'm amiss in there's multiple, but how did you get interested in that? And then tell us a little about it.
Okay. So I'm the last thing I expected to be when I grew up was a college professor, right? Like if you would have asked my high school class, like, who's the least likely person out of 700 of us? Maybe it's the whole school out of 2,800 of us, or whatever I had. I think you high back in the day. Who's the least likely to be a college professor one day? I think I would have got a plurality of the votes. Like more people voted for me than anyone else, right? So how did I end up here? All I wanted to be initially was an athlete, right? So I was a high school quarterback and long play in college, and lots of ups and downs in college. In many ways, I think I underachieved relative to what people expected me to do coming out of high school. And that sent me on a journey of trying to understand myself and why I wasn't achieving what I thought I should. And I started reading self-help books, personal development books. So I'm the kind of guy like that. I began, being interested in like Tony Robbins or Napoleon Hill or Zig Ziglar, and a lot of, I love these guys. But some people say, oh, that's pop psychology, that's pseudo-science, I don't say it's science, that's just pump up stuff. But it really helped me. And enough of these people, Tony Robbins in particular, guys like Brendon Burchard, talked about research. Like they talked about, hey, this isn't just our idea, this is supported by research at such and such university. And so I started reading books like Mindset by Carol Dweck, or books that weren't necessarily written by scientists, but were about science. Books like Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell and Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And then I began reading widely books like Flow from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. So I don't know if your audience might not know any of these books, but they might know some of them. But also I just realized like I fell in love with this, and it started helping me on the field. Got a brief stint with the Oakland Raiders. Then I played a long time in the Arena Football League. In fact, I'm still in the Arena Football. Well, it's called Arena Football 1 now. I'm 43. And it transformed my performance. So I'm in love with psychology. And then I make it to the Oakland Raiders after being really falling far down the totem pole in college. Like I was highly recruited out of high school. Places like Penn State and, big school, BYU, big schools offered me scholarships. And my senior season, I ended up being the backup quarterback at Occidental College. I don't even think they have a football program anymore. So I got the D3 program. And when I was there, this is when I realized I needed to kind of look within, and I started reading a lot of these books. And I set a goal that I'm going to make it to the NFL. And like very few Division III athletes ever make it to the NFL. It's like it's very, 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 very small. It's a small percentage of Division I athletes. Division III is like almost nobody. Backups in Division III, Brian, I don't think it's ever been done. I don't think everyone's ever been a backup in Division III and made the NFL. But that's what happened. I ended up, how long I stayed in the NFL, that's a different story. But I was signed. I signed a contract with that then Oakland Raiders. And I was on the roster for a few months. And then I was actually with the organization for 2 years and kind of this strange holding pattern. But okay, so that was my trajectory. And my wife was on board. And of course, she's this like wonderful person who's been very patient with my, kind of Peter Pan goal of like never growing up and wanting to play a sport my whole life. But when the Raiders thing didn't work out, I said, hey, look, I want to go play arena football. I'd like to get another shot in the NFL. Let's pursue this. She said, cool. Let's also finish your education. So I finished my bachelor's degree. I have a bunch of different transcripts from different universities because I've been to all these places. I cobbled together my transcripts, ended up graduating from Utah Valley University. And then I got into a executive MBA program at Irvine. And this is very much her influence, right? She was like, look, you need to have some type of credential that qualifies you, like, outside of football. It's very wise and not where I was thinking all the time. But I did this. The day I finished like my in-class work at UC Irvine, I responded to an email that I had. I didn't even know how I got on this, from the University of Pennsylvania, where they have advertised this Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program. And I love my MBA. Well, I should say, I really like my MBA, but I love psychology. And I was like, shoot, I should apply for this. I was like, but it's Penn, I'm probably not going to get it. I'll just give it a shot. So I rip off this application on the day of, like, writing application when you're considering going to competitive graduate school. My suggestion for anyone in the audience is don't do it the day of, but I do it the day, in fact, the night of. And I rip off this application letter. And then I guess, I don't know. I guess they could tell that I knew my stuff because I'd been reading so much, like voraciously, like, I don't know, 25 books a year, something like, but like really reading them, like notes in the margins, not just like reading them to get done. And so I knew this stuff. And then I think they could tell that my application. And then I eventually got in. When I get in, I'm thinking, this is the peak of education I'll ever do. I have a master's from UC Irvine in business, and I'm about to get a master's in positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And then when I'm at Penn, I meet this person named Angela Duckworth, who at the time was not nearly as famous as she is now. Now she's one of the most famous like living psychologists, I guess, by some metrics, because she wrote this wildly successful book called Grit. And she's writing it kind of at the time that I meet her. And we really hit it off and became friends first. I mean, she was a professor in the program. But we started talking about achievement and grit and deliberate practice, and I'll probably get to later in our discussion today. And I remember one day I was getting ready to go on an arena football practice, and I'm on the phone with her, and she said, "Danny, what are you going to do when you get your master's degree?" I said, "Well, I'll probably work and do consulting and help with it." So that's cool. So you have ever thought of getting your PhD? I said, "Well, I have, but I really have to maybe I'll do it when I'm a little older and I've kind of established." And she said, "Well, have you ever thought about being my PhD student?" And now I'm like, whoa, I know, I'm going to UVU, and then got a couple master's degrees. But Angela Duckworth, you get into Angela Duckworth's, to be her PhD student, I think she gets, I don't know, 200 applications, something like this a year. It's an insane number. And they're all people that are really scoring well and have great academic history. And I was a jock. She's saying, "Why don't you try to do this?" And I was like, "Well, because my academic background, I don't think it." She said, "Well, look, why don't you take the GRE, see if your score's competitive. Let's see what we can do." I ended up getting in. It was a long process. I'm getting in. So it was 2 years to even get right. I'd be a research assistant. Now I'm mid-30s. And now this is around the time you and I met, Bryan. And then the kind of struggle being at the University of Pennsylvania while trying to provide for a family of of 3, 4, and eventually 5. And there's a lot of work. But yeah, so that's my journey. That's how I got into it. Just I was an athlete that loved research, loved psychology, because I felt like it helped me. And then I kind of got pulled into this by almost like Forrest Gump, by the best people in the industry, and then, or in the industry, but in the field. And then here I am, right? Extremely lucky. I know that. And okay, so that was a really long answer to your first question, but very long.
Well, let me jump in, Danny. I think it's actually very interesting. The way that I see it is that trajectory, the path that you were on, is actually very in line with Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. Because the path wasn't you say lucky, that's great, but the path wasn't just easy. You just said, you said the words, you were a jock. And so you were focused on other things or playing sports, which I still think is amazing. And yet you did the work necessary. You put in, you developed grit in order to get into the PhD. So it sounds pretty fascinating that, I don't know, that book kind of tells your story a little bit. Would you agree, or do you think
I think in some ways it does. In fact, I think in a special edition, I can't remember, one of the publisher's editions, I think I'm in the epilogue of the book somewhere.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I think Angela thinks in some ways it does.
Yeah.
But, and grit is part of it. Having an incredible support system of my family. I wouldn't have done my life without my Tilly. No way. Patience from kids, my extended family. And then without I've had lots of mentors. Carol Dweck was one of them. She was wonderful, kind of got me up. She advised my capstone in my master's program. But then Angela kind of being, the primary, at least professional figure that took a chance on me and spent countless hours on me. I'm sure I frustrated her, but my gosh, she was within that name, Angela is Angel. And I feel for me, she was that. She kind of, not to be thorny or sappy, but she made a huge difference. And so you can have all the grit you want, but you also need to rely on a team of people.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe, follow, and download our episode. Your support allows us to bring more intentional guests just like this, and it means the world to us. Now, let's get back to the episode. Danny, you've worked with, Carol Dweck, Angela Duckworth, and obviously there's other people that you and I know that you've worked with, but even those two, they're foundational in that genre, right? Mindset, psychology, grit. So, dude, I'm with you that you have mentors in your corner that are pretty phenomenal. Those of us that read the books were like, dude, these are awesome, but you get to actually interact with the people, which I think is really great, really cool.
They represent what they research. Carol is like Angela. She really represents somebody. Carol took a chance on me with as early as anyone, right? In my master's program, right? And she wouldn't have, if she had just sized me up by saying, well, here's this graduate of kind of this, and UVU is great, but not the most prestigious program in the world. It's an opportunity program. That's what it's meant to be. And not Stanford, at least in some ways, or many ways. But she's going to give me a shot. And so because she doesn't believe that you are fixed. She doesn't believe that, your background represents your potential. And so these people aren't, yeah, they're wonderful. And I think you're pushing back on like, well, you haven't just been lucky. Yeah, you're right. I have been gritty. I have had a growth mindset, but I've also been really fortunate to have the right people around.
Well, then teach us a little bit, Danny. In the purpose of this show, The Intentional Way, we want to learn things that help us be more intentional, to live intentional lives. So what is it that you've learned in the programs you've been through with the people you've worked with that would be instructive? But tell us a little more about what we can do to be more intentional within the realm of your expertise.
Okay, so first things first, you asked about what positive psychology is. I just want to answer that question because I realized I left that hanging. Positive psychology is the study of human flourishing. And traditional psychology, especially from about the 1940s to about 2000, has really focused on helping people to overcome mental disorders, challenges, anxiety, depression, and all of the different things that people struggle with. And it's a very noble cause. And there's been lots of progress made. There's lots of disorders or mental illnesses that we can either entirely fix or that we can dramatically improve based on the research that's come through that. However, improving what's not working in someone's life is not the same thing as cultivating an optimal life. And so Marty Seligman and James Pawlowski, who kind of run that program, positive psychology program at Penn, they often talk about it on a -10 to +10 continuum. And especially following World War II, psychology, if you think about a positive behavioral therapist or something like this, what they were trying to do is to get you out of the kind of the disordered range, mental illness, where you're below zero substantially, to be back into that middle range. Okay, maybe I'm neutral. That's 0 point, maybe a little above zero, at least not way below zero. Positive psychology says, okay, let's take someone, they can also, positive psychology is not just for the normal population. You can also take someone that is really struggling. But it also applies to the normal population in ways that classic clinical psychology maybe does not. And it says, how do we take someone wherever they are and get them to experience the more optimal, like best things in life, the 8s, 9s, and 10s? What does that look like? And there wasn't a lot of empirical research about this at the time. So the field of positive psychology was founded, I believe, the year 2000 by Marty Seligman. He's Angela Duckworth's mentor and is still a professor at Penn. And at the time, there hadn't been a lot of empirical, like the humanist psychology, like Abraham Maslow and others had a lot of theoretical work, but there wasn't a lot of like experimental, real kind of rigorous quantitative work on understanding what makes people flourish. Okay, so that's the program that I began in. And so that runs in a lot of what I think about. I think about, like I have 2 studies right now focused on, well, what are the experiences and the mindsets that lead us to have the highest levels of well-being? Like what matters most? Is it the experiences you have in life, or is it how you look at it, how you look at your future? Like that's one thing that I look at. But I would say that's really at this point a little bit ancillary to my primary research focus, which is really human achievement. And that's what got me into this, right? So as a struggling quarterback trying to figure out my life, like I was looking for answers, and I was I'd gone all in on maybe some of the wrong advice. And then I came up on some reliable practices that helped me realize how I could improve, what my potential was, and disabuse me of this illusion that our potential is determined by some weird kind of abstract notion of talent, which we all believe it. Like 99.9% of people on the street say, well, talking about talent, they are sure it exists. Like they're sure that some people have musical talent. They're sure that some people have talent for math or whatever it is, because we talk about it all the time. Like it's totally real. But if you ask a scientist to measure talent, we don't have great answers. We have an IQ test. It's not super predictive of expertise at the highest levels, at least in most domains. And so when I learned that, I became fascinated. Okay, so if it's not talent, or at least we don't have any great evidence that it's talent, then what else is it? And so I said, okay, if you want to be intentional about who you can become as a professional, if you want to be intentional about how you can develop your skills, there is a very well-trod kind of, and I don't use this word lightly in science, because we don't say it very often, proven, I'll say proven path to skill development, and it's called deliberate practice. And it is, there's this notion out there that if we just spend a lot of time at something, we're going to get really good. Right? If I spend 10,000 hours, that's the That's what people say, right?
Yeah.
And they get this from Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. It's a wonderfully written book. Actually, Malcolm Gladwell never said this in the book Outliers, but that's the takeaway. And there's been lots of, I think, I want to say Darren Shay and Justin Bieber wrote a song about 10,000 hours, making someone an expert in falling in love. And we have this weird notion that just spending 10,000 hours is going to magically turn us into Michael Jordan. But that's not what Gladwell said. And it's certainly not what the researchers that Gladwell was quoting, what he was kind of investigating, sharing their research. It's certainly not what they said. So think about the things that you do all the time. We all go out and drive. We all go out and have conversations. We all, pick any mundane thing you might do. Are we experts at driving? I love Utahns. I love Utah. We're rated the worst drivers in America. That's our actual statistic. We're driving a lot of time. We're not very good drivers. Okay. We probably driven for thousands of hours. I was in Utah. Are we all great conversationalists? Well, we all know that's not true from human experience. So why is it that you spend a lot of time doing something and not become an expert? And the reason why is because people are being systematic or intentional about how they improve. And so the researcher who has done the most work in this area is a guy named Anders Ericsson. He passed away. I think, Bryan, when you and I were doing most of our work together, I think he was still living. He passed away, I want to say a little after, I don't think he died of COVID, but he passed away after the pandemic had begun. But Anders did foundational work in showing what's possible for human beings under optimal conditions when they're practicing the right way. And he basically discovered that in many different domains, that music, board games, sports, surgery, the people that were the very best at what they did followed a specific protocol for how they improved. One is 4 steps. These are the steps of deliberate practice. Okay, so we'll keep parsing a lot of time. So deliberate and intentional, I think, are pretty good synonyms, right?
Yeah.
So deliberate practice is 4 things. One is, if you want to get better at something, first is you need a stretch goal. And it's going to be specific. This is how I want to improve. What is a stretch goal? It means something that is challenging, not so challenging, like it's beyond your reach. It's in what's called the zone of proximal development, but it's challenging, but it's also possible, right? The second thing is that you practice towards that goal with 100% of your attentional focus, effort, and energy, right? You're putting everything that you can into whatever practice session. When you do that, you're going to get feedback. You're going to get feedback both in the process of, I played the piano, it didn't sound right. You're also, in deliberate practice, you're getting feedback from an expert mentor, someone who has trained the best. Actually, now people are using AI. So in some ways, we all have access to it in ways we never have before. You can use AI to coach you in your writing and lots of things. But you get feedback from someone that is expert and that can tell you this is where you made a mistake. Okay, so, and then when you do that, and you're always going to make a mistake, right? If you're setting a stretch goal, you're not going to be perfect at it. Then the next key is you reflect on what you did wrong and you refine your processes and you practice again and you get better. And then you set a new stretch goal and you go through this very intentional process. I'm doing a study right now that we're about to submit with another professor at BYU. We're looking at different ways that people practice chess. And I won't say too much about it because we haven't submitted it yet. But basically, a lot of people, the 10,000 hour rule just says, hey, if I get on and I just play a bunch of chess, I'll get better. We've actually found that people that review their games, people that like intentionally work on puzzles or things like this that are specifically designed to improve their skill, improve about 3 times faster than people that just play games. And when we see someone improve really fast, and this is another line of my research, the intuition that we have. So, John learns faster than Jim. Why? I've actually asked this in some of my research. You give people, ask people to imagine a situation. Well, John and Jim practice the same exact amount of time. Why is John learn faster than Jim? Because John is, what do you think they say? Why do you think people think John learns faster than Jim?
He's more talented.
He's
smarter.
That's the majority of answers that people give is that he's more talented. Learning rate is hugely associated in people's minds, like I think almost like unconsciously, as being a signal of talent. And yet there's so much research saying that there's a lot of things you can do to increase the speed at which you improve something. And maybe the best way is to do deliberate practice. And so what I can primarily share with your audience is, if you're trying to do things the intentional way, you got to decide what it is that you want to improve, and then try to create a program of improvement that is structured in such a way that you are navigating the challenges with an expert coach, that you're picking specific goals, and that you're getting clear feedback about how you're doing, and you're trying again. If you're not doing that, you're missing opportunities to learn at the rate that you could. You're wasting time, and you're never going to achieve what the people who are approaching their practice in the intentional way would achieve. So I think that would be my primary spiel I'd share with you.
Danny, that's beautiful. And I hope that our listeners are literally writing down notes, because that's beautiful. It occurs to me, I talk about a lot of it like us being in default mode, like we just wander through our lives kind of on default, right? Autopilot, if you want to think of it that way. And what I'm hearing you say is, if you're playing chess, or if you're doing a skill, whatever it is, you're at work, I don't care. But if you're in default mode for 10,000 hours, at minimum, you're reinforcing bad habits at 10,000 hour pace. So that's how I can understand why you've said that at the end of 10,000 hours doesn't make us an expert. And it's really the way we're practicing in that feedback loop, in addition to what, those three elements you mentioned. It's just beautiful, because if not, you'll just reinforce what's already default in you, or the way you learned it, which might have not been the best way to learn it.
Absolutely. And, the little practice is not always fun. Hey, if I'm in default mode, I can listen to a podcast. I can listen to music. I can sing, in my car by myself or whatever. And that's fine. I'm not suggesting everyone goes out and tries to be an expert driver. That. But like some things, like they'll find it in default mode. But if you're really trying to improve, a lot of us are just comfortable doing what we already know. I don't want to practice my left-hand shot. I'm already pretty good with my right. I don't want to learn this new song. I've already kind of mastered this other one. And so it feels like regression, not progression, when we try something new, when we set these stretch goals. And so a lot of people miss these growth opportunities because they want to stick with what's comfortable, and they feel like if they step out of that box, if they're not, they're going to look worse, when in reality what they're doing is holding themselves back from the long-term improvement trajectory.
Yeah, such a beautiful way to put it. It's so evident to me that this is your life. So thank you for sharing that. Speaking of intentionality, what is your intention for listening to this episode? Are you simply passing the time, or are you here because you truly want to improve something in your life? The way we act is a direct reflection on what matters to us. So right now, while you're here, take a quick moment and rate this episode, or leave a quick comment. Pulling your thoughts into words is powerful, and it turns passive listening into action. When you act on your intention, that's where change happens. Your rating, your comment, your share, they're not just clicks. They're a signal that what we're building together matters, that conversations like this deserve to grow. Each action helps this message reach more people who are looking to live intentionally. And here on YouTube, tapping that like button, commenting below, or sharing this video with someone who matters to you is telling the algorithm that intentionality is worth spreading. It takes just a few seconds, and it creates a bigger ripple effect than you might realize. I created this show because I wanted to help people find their way, find the intentional way. Now, if you'd kind of bring us back on the ground for a minute, what is a way you're doing this? What is something that you're working on in your life that you're doing that with expert feedback and that loop of assessing your progress?
So as a research psychologist, the currency of the realm, so to speak, about what we do, our domain, is how many papers you publish, right? And I'm early career, and I'm fighting like crazy to get my stuff out there. And it's very competitive. The field of psychology, when I left, I shouldn't say but, because I'm still playing small arena football. But when I moved like my primary career ambitions toward psychology, I thought, well, I'm leaving something that was very kind of fickle and very few people succeed to something that's much more safe, being a research psychologist. When I got in the field, I realized that being in this field, there's far more people with PhDs than there are opportunities at universities. That's just the reality of it. And so you really have to use these principles I'm talking about to stand out. You have to be, as Cal Newport, wrote a great book with several great books. He talks about being so good so good you can't fail, or so good they can't ignore you is his term.
Yeah.
I think you got that.
So good they can't ignore you.
I think you got that from Steve Martin, the comedian. But you have to do that in psychology. So how how can I be so good they can? And what I'm trying to do is I have these stretch goals. This is how many cases I'll publish this year. These are the ideas I get, and then I write, and then I get feedback. I get feedback from, I use AI. Hey, what do you think about this? How can I improve? How can I? And then I also get feedback from mentors. So I've had, you mentioned a couple of them. I've been so blessed with like the world's greatest mentors. BYU, where I am now, even though I'm on the faculty, there's always a faculty mentor. My mentor is Diane Tice, who is, I want to say, the most published person in the department. And she's had a great career. Her husband is a guy named Roy Baumeister, who wrote books like Willpower years ago. And I think he's the most cited social psychologist of all time, potentially, or right up there. And so when I'll write something. What do you think about this? I like this. I don't like this. Here's fix. Here's how you reframe this. And so I'm just going through this process in my own life right now, as I'm trying to become a better psychologist, thinking about how to structure an argument, how to set up an experiment. And our work shows like there's probably not a limit on the ways that you can apply this method. Like there are very like classic domains. You're like, oh yeah, I see I can be a better free throw shooter, or better violinist, or a better chess player using deliberate practice. But how do I become a better manager or a better psychologist? These are the criteria for excelling in these domains is less clear. So sometimes you're like, well, maybe I can't do deliberate practice in these domains. But we've actually done some research now with, for example, world-class venture capitalists, people who are at the top 100 venture capitalists in the United States, billion, like with the dollar deals. And it turns out they're using principles of deliberate practice too. It's like, here's my goal. I'm going to pursue with all my energy, but then I'm going to get this kind of like radical candor, this transparency. I'm like, hey, how am I really doing? Don't just be nice to me. Don't say I'm doing great. Like, I appreciate the support, and that's good. It makes me feel good. But how can I improve? And that's what I'm doing. And that's how I think how any listener out there, like, get real open about feedback. Angela Duckworth, who's will forever be my mentor, has this phrase, and it's so true. She said, feedback is magic. It's magic. You improve so much faster. Bryan, how good of a market? You're a world-class marketer. You build funnels, and I don't know if that's where you're focused on now. We haven't talked a ton about that. But in our history, I know you've done a ton of great work. How could you have done it without feedback? This is working. This isn't working.
No, that's actually one of my biggest frustrations currently with one specific client. It's like you produce things and then you need the feedback, and the feedback doesn't come. It's actually detrimental to my progress. Recognizing I know I have experience, I know what I'm doing, but there's still this feedback loop that's necessary in all things that I'm creating. So it's fascinating that you bring that, because it's actually something I'm working on right now. So yeah.
Got to have feedback. If you're trying to become good at something, we don't always love feedback. And we have all of this coaching and organizational psychology of how to give feedback in ways that don't offend people. And all these things. Well, from a learner's perspective, you need to learn to love feedback. Even if it doesn't, like, detach yourself. Yeah, emotionally, sometimes it's hard. My heart is on the line. I poured hours and hours into this document, and this person thinks it stinks. Okay. And they might be wrong in many ways, but there's always a signal. Again, I hate to keep quoting Angela, but she's such a formative.
Yeah, I find a way to be intentional in that, Danny, is recently I turned in a big project, and I was very proud of what we produced as a team to get in front of this client. And then when we got the feedback back, people started kind of picking it apart. And as soon as that feeling of like, oh man, I worked so hard, I had to extremely fast say, I invite the feedback. I need the feedback. They see perspectives that I don't see. And so I need if this is going to be great, I might have turned in something that I think is great, but if it's going to be great for the whole team, I need their feedback. So if you can cut off that voice that says, but I worked, and that offensiveness, man, you can move so much faster, because then we implemented the changes, and I think that it is better. I mean, it's all a matter of perspective, but I love that principle.
It's so hard to do. And I've been there myself, like in meetings with my mentors, and I'm like, hey, do you love this? And like almost to a person, each mentor is like, no. At some point, they're going to say no. And what I learned, and I guess apologizing for this a second ago, I'm quoting Angela quite a bit, but one thing she taught me is, this is what relates to writing, the reader is always right. And that sounds like the customer is always, does that mean they're always right? They always have the right perspective? No, it doesn't mean that. Sometimes they're wrong about the suggestion they're giving you, but the fact that something's coming up for them is real. And so that feedback, the reader is always right. The customer is always right. The coach is always right. It's not that what they're saying is necessarily the best advice. I mean, often it is. It may or may not be. You have to evaluate that as yourself as a learner. But the fact that there's always a signal there. Okay, something didn't click for them. What was it? And getting curious rather than defensive, like it sounds like you've been able to do, that's the trick. And a lot of it comes down to, it's that emotion, like being willing to accept that uncomfortability. But then, what one that allows us to be mature enough to do this is the way that we think about that feedback. And this comes back to the work on Carol Dweck, who's another, one of my other really important mentors. And her work on mindset says, if we think we can't change, if we think we are a fixed entity, whatever ability you have, that's what you always have. This feedback that wasn't good enough feels like a permanent judgment. You'll never make it. When you have a growth mindset, if you're really trying to approach from this point, and it takes emotional and cognitive control to be to say, when I get feedback that I don't like, okay, what is there to learn from this? Because I know fundamentally my abilities aren't fixed. I can always grow. I can always learn. I can always improve. And so approaching deliberate practice, approaching the feedback loops that way, that's another way that kind of magnifies the rate at which you improve, because there's no buffer of like trying to fight against things that can actually help you. And it really comes down, how do you look at yourself? If I look at myself as someone that can change, then we're always going to be defensive. The science is clear. You can change. Neuroscience shows. It's what cognitive psychology shows. What all the psychology shows. So accepting that reality and then looking for opportunities to grow, it transforms you, right?
Two things come to my mind is that phrase of the customer's always right or the reader's always right. I think we need to change that. Hear me out. The reader is always real. The customer is always real, because they're a real human being, and like what they shared with you mattered to them. And I think that's useful. But then the second thing is, I remember listening to Kobe Bryant, and you're an athlete. He was talking to another player and he said, did you play at your highest level? And he's like, yeah. Well, then you're going to lose sometimes despite your best efforts. And so sometimes we conflate, we're looking at the outcome, like that meeting you had with your mentors, like, oh, isn't this great? Like the outcome is that they say, this is great, Danny. That's the outcome we're after. But it was actually the process of like, I did my best effort and the outcome was different than I wanted, but the outcome is just feedback. And so, let's move, as opposed to treating the outcome as the effort, Yeah,
no, I love it. So I'll respond to both things you said. First is the feedback is all from someone else is always real. I think that's right. They're always right. Yeah. Sometimes they give crappy advice. So I think it catches your attention. So I like the phrase, but I think that it's always real. There's always a real signal there that you need to pay attention to. I think that's a more precise way to say it. So I like that amendment. The second thing is getting caught up in the outcome. Yeah, we judge ourselves by outcome. We get worried that what's this going to be, and we make that the whole thing that we're after. So what is it? What am I going to get? What's this going to look like in the end? And not only does it hamper performance, but it can also hamper motivation in many ways, right? Because the outcomes are going to fluctuate over time. Kobe Bryant, when he retired, he gave a talk at the Staples Center. He said, roughly quoted, you would think that when he said what's most meaningful to Kobe Bryant, the guy who won 5 championships, is considered one of the best ever, you'd think he'd say, well, I achieved more than I ever thought was possible. You think that's what he would say. But in his retirement speech at the Staples Center, he said, those mornings when you get up at 4 a.m., when your ankles hurt and your knees hurt, and you don't want to do it, you don't want to put forth the work, but you do it anyway, that is the dream. That's the dream. It's not the destination, it's the journey. It's exactly it's Bryan Hatch wisdom, right? It's not the outcome, it's the process. And when you can fall in love with, that is a mark of people that really can transcend their field, because they're able to go through this deliberate practice, all the things we're talking about, and have this sense of joy and euphoria in the process that keeps them motivated, keeps them doing these things in ways that people are always looking for a particular outcome. They're kind of, your ups and downs are too much. And so finding joy in the process, realizing when things are tough, that is the dream. I think that's one of the magic secrets of the deep secrets of people that are extraordinary achievers.
Well, Danny, it's been a pleasure having you with us here. Thank you for sharing your time with us and your expertise. There's so many more things that I want to talk to you about, but thank you so much for being here with us.
So far, Bryan, thank you, buddy. Great to see you again.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on The Intentional Way. I'm Bryan Hatch, and it's been a true privilege to share this time with you. If today's episode has inspired you in any way, shape, or form, please subscribe, follow, and download our episodes. Your support not only helps us grow, it also enables us to bring more insightful conversations and exceptional guests right to you. Living intentionally begins with a single step, yours. So let's make the most of it. Until next time, seek intention by being completely present.